The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions. Welcome to another edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with my usual co-host, Jonah Bronstein. He's of the New Bronstein Times, and being joined again after never having him on the show ever. He's now on for the second time in a short period. Joe Buscaglia of The Athletic. It is draft week, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to probably talk about little NBA playoffs. We're going to talk, or at least I should say right off the top, I think this is going to be the last time with my insufferable microphone. The good folks at The Athletic are sending me a new one. If you stick with it for about a minute and a half, this thing will regulate itself. For some reason, I don't do anything. I don't fiddle with the knobs. I don't do anything. It'll just regulate itself. So obviously I'm blown out right now, or at least I assume I am. And eventually it'll just kick in and start playing nice. So I just want to get that out of the way. Joe Buscaglia, thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tim. It's this week is probably like my favorite of the entire year, if I'm honest. It's kind of how I cut my teeth in the industry. And then, I don't follow it as closely during the college football season as I used to. But once we get past like the playoffs being done, dive real deep into it. It's a lot of fun to try and figure out what's going on.
I'll go ahead and give my preamble regarding the draft, mock drafts. And it's why I have Joe on, is because I don't follow it. I find it to be so much wasted energy. I'm not saying that Joe is wasting his energy. I find it that it is so, I guess I get so easily aggravated and frustrated that I know that I'm writing about somebody, excuse me, or analyzing somebody who almost certainly won't be on the team. And so, but it's part of the exercise, and I get it. People who are into the draft, you want to explore all the players as potential Bills, kind of, and then you know all about them when the Jets draft them, or the Dolphins draft them, or the Steelers draft them. I mean, I get it. It's a process, but to me, I think I'm just so on the surface when it comes to the draft. I am more of along the line of tell me who they're getting, and then I'll tell you all about it.
It's the beauty of the unknown that really does it for people. I mean, you can't screw it up unless you're the Jets in draft time. Like it's the universal rule. As long as you do something that doesn't completely tick off your fan base, then you're going to be just fine. And even when you do tick off the fan base, like not to really get into it right at the start here, but back in 2018, the majority of people did not love the Josh Allen pick here in Buffalo, but they kind of came around to it. Obviously, he outplayed that draft position. Now is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but the initial impact of it was like, whoa, what are they doing here? Why are they taking such a wild swing on this guy? And they were proven right. So even if you don't end up liking the pick by the time Thursday is done, there's probably a pretty safe chance that you're going to embrace it by some point. Maybe, probably mid-June, I think, is the spot where people start to get over it and they're like, no, that's my guy now. That's my guy. And it's the eternal optimism approach.
What was your take on the draft, on the Josh Allen pick?
I really liked him as a prospect. I think there was, for me, I was higher on Josh Rosen than I should have been, because I saw a lot of the accuracy within the pocket. At that point, we really didn't know Brandon Beane's tendencies at all, because it was his first draft, and we didn't really realize that he loves measurables, elite traits, everything like that. That's how he usually swings in the first round. And that's kind of why I was not all the way in on the Josh Allen pick, just in terms of projecting it. But, once we've gotten to know Brandon Beane, we see it like, okay, that has hit his type to an absolute T. I mean, super raw. I mean, I remember going back and watching every single one of his games right after they drafted him. And it's like, oh, I see why they really like him, but it's going to take some work here. And they completely reformatted his entire throwing structure to a couple of different elements, like throwing left. They made his step go a little bit not as far to the left, where he opens up his hips. Like, these are all things that they had to work on early with him, but they did it. So in that respect, it was a great pick. But yeah, I whiffed on that one, because I thought they were gonna they would have liked Rosen more than him.
This is where my approach serves me well.
Right. Sure.
I believe it's healthy for me, because when people will say, well, what do you think of the Josh Allen pick? My response was always, I have no idea. We're going to find out. Let's wait and see. He could be great. I know what the pluses are. I know what the minuses are of the scouting reports coming out. Let's give the guy a chance. Let's see what happens, as opposed to a lot of people who just had to dig in and I guess defend their pre-draft grades, which is a danger in this line of work, in this draft cottage industry. You get so many people who not only do they give you the mock draft, and then they'll come out with their immediate grades, which are what? Based on their own mock drafts.
Right. Confirmation bias.
Right. So it's weird that way. You take a healthy approach to it, Joe. I've always respected the way that you do it.
I appreciate
just not
that.
the way that I just can't do it. I just can't get there. And that's why I'm glad that you're my teammate. And anywhere I've ever been, I've always had a teammate who was into the draft, going back to Alan Wilson at the Buffalo News. It'd be like, man, this is all you. I don't watch college football much. My Saturdays are generally a day for me to disconnect from football. And so, yeah, I'll just rely on your expertise, which is why we're having you here on the show.
Well, to me, it's like trying to figure out a puzzle. And I love doing that stuff. And, trying to, go off context clues, historical data, certain leans of how they, and this is a total Bills approach rather than a macro level draft approach, but, how they build their roster throughout time. And I think you can learn a lot just by looking on their history and what they valued in the past and projecting it into the future. Because, there's the reason why this year is so intriguing about them is because they don't have like a premium need. Every single year before this one, when Brandon Beane has been drafting, it's been quarterback, spent one on a middle linebacker, which they view as premium, 3 technique defensive tackle, which they think is a huge position in their scheme. And then last year was the pass rusher with Greg Rousseau. Those have been their first 4 first-round picks under Beane. But this year, what do they need? Second cornerback, which they've kind of just gotten by with for the past 5 years. Interior offensive line. Brandon Beane has not spent anything more than a 5th round pick on a guard only since he's gotten here. Tight end, which, maybe they still have Dawson Knox, and there really isn't a tight end to take there. Safety, but they still have Poyer and Hyde. Linebacker, but they still have Edmonds and Milano. And then running back, which everyone hates the idea of taking a running back in the first round. So all of those are their main needs. And wide receiver, I'll throw that in there. But they still have Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis and Jamison Crowder and Isaiah McKenzie. So it's totally in the air, because a core building block that you usually use for a first round pick I mean, this is kind of the year where it's the exception to the rule rather than what they normally do.
Sounds like a lot of needs, though. I think you listed more positions than they have picks.
Yeah. I mean, those are like would like to have needs rather than gotta have sort of thing. And I know a lot of people look at like cornerback as gotta have it, absolutely have to have it. But I think there's a lot of clues from Bean and McDermott's past that show us that it's not as much of a slam dunk as a lot of people think it is. And then when you add in the cornerback element to it of the draft prospects, like a guy I respected throughout the whole thing is Jim Nagy, who is the executive director of the Senior Bowl, 18-year scout, said, cornerbacks, average class. There's some fool's gold in the early rounds. That's the exact term he used. I'm like, I don't really know if that's really what you want to do, especially when you haven't really given that much attention to that second cornerback spot since Bean has been here. So it's all those needs. That's why it's wide open in that first round. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of variance in terms of positions that are being mocked to the Bills.
Well, let's get out the shovel here and let's look at the cornerback position. Joe, you talked about reading the tea leaves and how much you enjoy that. That certainly came through in your recent cornerback analysis piece, in which you take a look at how Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have approached that position. And we're always talking about the second boundary cornerback because Tre'Davious White has been here the entire time that Sean McDermott has been here. And yes, they took him with their first pick that year when Sean McDermott came in, and you look at that as, wow, what a building block piece for the organization. This is how Sean McDermott builds it. And that was pre-Brandon Beane. That was Doug Whaley was still the general manager. But since then, you took a look at what they do at the position, not only in the draft, but also through free agency. They don't invest in this position. They don't invest money in free agency. Like we saw with Levi Wallace. They don't invest draft capital in this position. So, but the one caveat or asterisk regarding this is, and you mentioned, yes, Tre'Davious White here, not a premium need. Premium need, again, maybe from the outside world, the general football consensus, but within the Bills organization, this hasn't been a premium need position. They've never shown it to be. They've made do. But to me, the asterisk is you wouldn't really just be drafting your second cornerback. For a majority of the season, you'd be drafting potentially your best cornerback, your lead cornerback, because Tre'Davious White coming back from that ACL injury. So again, that's me with my big setup, my big windup for your piece, and what you think all of that means for Thursday and Friday.
Yeah, I think there's the Tre'Davious White piece is really important to acknowledge right at the outset, because it all depends on when they think he could potentially get back. Right. I mean, he suffered the injury late November on Thanksgiving night, wound up having the surgery on December 15th, according to Jordan Poyer. So that would put the 9-month time frame at September 15th, right in the middle of September, which is just at the start of the season. So that's usually the rule of thumb for torn ACLs, the 9-month return date. Some players beat that. Some players take a little bit longer, but I think for the most part, it's a safe rule of thumb. And if they're only without Tre'Davious White for, let's say, the first month and a half of the season, is that really the worst case scenario? Is that worth to them using a premium building block of a first round piece when they have not really invested in that second boundary position at all, like you just laid out? I mean, there's so many different examples throughout time. Brandon Beane has not has not taken a boundary cornerback in the first 5 rounds in any of the 4 drafts he's been with the Bills. They have only signed stopgap veteran solutions like EJ Gaines, Sharice Wright, Phillip Gaines, Kevin Johnson, EJ Gaines again, Josh Norman. Last year, Levi Wallace was the stopgap guy on a 1-year deal. So that's kind of it. And they still really like Dane Jackson. And I thought that really came through in the pre-draft press conference last week from what Brandon Beane was talking about. It was a pretty good defense of the guy rather than waffling at all. So if they were to have Dane Jackson in the starting lineup, I feel like they would be completely fine with it. And they still have 10 million in cap space. And there's like 3 corners out there right now with a lot of experience that they could go and sign right now. They could always trade for James Bradbury of the Giants if they really wanted to, send a future pick down Joe Shane and Brian Dable's way, and then they solve a need right then and there. So there's a lot of different avenues here that don't involve investing your top draft resource in a position that you have not believed in. And it goes even deeper than just the first 4 drafts of Beane. We have a pretty large sample size of what Beane and McDermott do with the draft, or what Beane has been a part of when McDermott has been the defensive coordinator for a long time now. I mean, he was basically second in charge with Carolina for all the years that Sean McDermott was their defensive coordinator. And so that's a total of 10 drafts, not including the Tre'Davious White draft, because Sean McDermott was basically the GM of that and Beane wasn't there. In those 10 drafts, the Panthers/Bills have only taken a boundary cornerback in the first 5 rounds 3 times. Once in 2012, Josh Norman, who was a 5th round pick, and then twice in 2016, which was James Bradbury in the 2nd round, late 2nd, and then Daryl Worley in the late 3rd. So you look at all of that history, it's just not something that they have really invested a lot of resources into, because part of it is they believe so firmly that they can get the most out of anyone at that position. And they've been proven right all the way across the board. Tre'Davious, just in Buffalo alone, Tre'Davious White, Dane Jackson, Levi Wallace, there's a bunch there.
I think there's also an element of cap management too, and not just of the short term, but we're talking long term. If you draft a cornerback early and he works out, he's going to make a lot of money. And it's difficult when you already have Tre'Davious White on your roster making a lot of money to have so much dedicated to one position, as important as that position is, when you still need to pay your franchise quarterback and all these other things. So to me, I wonder how much through his research that he's done, going back to being a part of the Carolina Panthers front office, to where Brandon Beane has maybe gotten away from the general line of thinking in the NFL that cornerback is the 3rd most important position on the field. Some would even say 2nd, perhaps, after quarterback, edge rusher, maybe even left tackle. But still, I think a lot of people look at cornerback and just want to throw a ton of money at it.
Yeah.
And the Bills have to have looked at this at some point and said, we need to watch what we do here because we need to spread it around a little bit.
I think a lot of it has to do with the scheme that they run too, because they are not a man heavy scheme. They are mostly zone, probably about 75 to 80% of the time, maybe a little bit less than 75, but still predominantly zone defense. And they look for certain things out of their prospects, and it doesn't necessarily have to be can turn and run and be on an island with a receiver. That's just not the case most times in their scheme. There are some instances where they're in man, they get caught, and you see Levi Wallace getting beat down the field on a fly route. That it will happen from time to time. I would argue that the second boundary cornerback position is the least important of the 5 defensive back positions that they have out there every single week. I mean, the top cornerback position is really important, and they have that in Tre'Davious White, and they have him locked in for the next 3 years at least. Then you have Taron Johnson, who's basically a linebacker because he's part of their base defense. That's super important. They paid him a bunch of money during the season last year to keep him around. Then you have Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, who, safety is very sneakily one of the most important positions on their entire defensive scheme, because they do so much and it's so subtle how much that they do. I mean, Micah Hyde takes away that deep middle so often. I mean, it was on display in the Patriots playoff game with that ridiculous interception, but just even his mere presence takes the idea of throwing the ball deep down the sideline away from a lot of different teams. They just won't test it because he's that good. Jordan Poyer is great down in the box, and they both those guys have the ability to switch positions with the other, and just to give different looks to an offense. And so you have those four spots that are so important. And by the way, I mean, we've been talking about boundary cornerback this whole time, but safety is like the sneakiest big need that they have right now, because Jordan Poyer is not happy with his contract. Tim, you communicated with Drew Rosenhaus, and Rosenhaus said, we've approached the Bills for an extension. Not the other way around, mind you. And even when Brandon Beane was talking about it last week, there was never any hint that it's something that they wanted to take care of. It was a lot of, we love Jordan and we want him here, but sometimes business is business. And he was asked about projecting Jordan forward, even outside of the realm of contract stuff. And he's like, well, I think of it as the now. Okay. So you think of it as the now in the past, but you don't think about it as the future, because this guy is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. I thought it was somewhat telling, maybe a slight hint, because, they're leaving their options open. There's three really good first round safety prospects this year. I think that's a really sneaky spot for them.
And as you say, as important as that position is, maybe it's time to reload, because and have the guy waiting. You're not bringing him in to take over for Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer, but in a couple of years, if that position's so important to you, you're going to want him groomed. You're going to want him under the tutelage of Hyde and Poyer, learning the ropes, learning the defense. Makes sense to me.
Yeah. And that's I'm glad you brought that up, because I've got my annual draft files dropping over at The Athletic on Tuesday morning. And yeah, I know.
What?
I spent way too much time. Our editor is going to kill me because it's way too long, but it's fine. And the one quote,
Wait a minute.
What? Go on.
If that's going to keep him busy, how come he's been up my ass? Sounds to me like he's got enough to worry about.
I just filed it at 1:00. So maybe there was some time in between.
This morning. It happened this morning is when it happened.
Well, there you go. There's your smoking gun. And the quote that I went back and found was from last year's pre-draft press conference from Brandon Beane. And he essentially said, even if it doesn't fill an immediate need, let's say we have a guy entering the final year of his deal, we'll bring in the player to compete with that incumbent player, and then if they decide to move on from the other player, then they'll have a natural replacement. And that speaks to the theory of that the Bills do not generally like to play their rookies a bunch. Really, the only exceptions straight out of the gate was Zay Jones, ironically enough, Tre'Davious White, and Tremaine Edmonds. Everybody else had to go through a certain waiting period to get into the starting lineup in their rookie season, or they were just rotational players all the way through. It's not part of their development. Sean McDermott believes in the rookie wall. It's all very real. So that's part of the emphasis against cornerback in the first round, because if they don't really like to play their rookies 100% anyway, then why force the cornerback spot in an average class that may not end up helping you a ton in the first year if they had their way. So there's a lot to chew on with how they approach building their roster through the first round. And that's why I always come back to, they could take a corner. I mean, can't rule it out because it's a need. And if the top guy is on their board, sure. But they're not going to force it. That's what I keep coming back to. And I think there's better prospects out there at other positions unless someone completely falls down the board.
What do you think about it just in general, say for maybe a few positions, just picking the best player available, that this roster is deep enough that you just try to get a first round talent and see where they fit in once they're there?
Yeah, I think that's probably the way to go. I think there does need to be some bit of foresight into it. Like, don't go out there and pick a quarterback. Don't go out there and pick a defensive end because you've done that how many
Yeah, no,
times over
yeah,
the
I would
past 2 years.
say the whole
Right.
defensive line they've invested so
Yeah.
much. That would
Yeah,
be
they're
right,
good
right,
there.
right.
Everything else I think should mostly be on the table. Like maybe not a center in the first round because they just locked in Morse for another couple of years. But everything else should be potentially out there for the Bills to take at 25. And again, like we pointed out at the beginning, like that's why this whole year is such a crapshoot for them, and trying to figure out clues of what they can do because they could be all over the board. And you can make a good justification for a lot of different spots. And I saw our friend Jerry Sullivan advocating for an offensive piece, and I totally hear that side of the argument because they really haven't done that just yet this offseason outside of Jamison Crowder, just to help their fastball a bit more. He brought up the notion of a wide receiver. I've been kind of the running back guy since late March, since after free agency, because I think Breece Hall fits everything they want to do out of Iowa State, even though a lot of people hate the idea of a first round running back and it goes against general draft analytics and everything like that.
You're starting to see the Bills getting a running back with their first pick in mock drafts over the past couple of weeks. Do you think that's just in response to what Brandon Beane said at his most recent availability, where he said that we do have first round grades on running backs, but is there more to that? Do you think that people are starting to tap into the idea that the Bills can go running back there?
I think a fair bit of both. And it should have raised everyone's eyebrows when Brandon Beane admitted that they have had multiple running backs on their with a first round grade throughout the time that he's been there. Like when he said that, I wrote that over at The Athletic, and the first comment was, "Oh, okay, so he had Saquon Barkley, a first round grade. So what?" And it's like, no, he said plural. So whether it was Josh Jacobs or Rashad Penny or what was that guy's name? David Wilson, who was a first round pick. I would tend to think it was Barkley. I think he probably had a first round grade on Josh Jacobs. I think he probably had a first round grade on Travis Etienne last year. And as much as, the generally preconceived notions about what to do with the draft, I think the Bills would have had a really tough decision if it was Travis Etienne versus Greg Rousseau last year. And I think they might have gone Etienne over him. So because of that, that's why they are totally fine with the idea of adding a running back. And it just makes so much sense for what they're trying to do now, right? Because Sean McDermott has been a huge proponent of and making some not so subtle jabs at the offensive coordinator's way when they do not have the threat to run. And they started getting going once they started utilizing more 2 tight end sets. They went out this offseason, invested in OJ Howard. Now they have 2 tight ends that can give them a little bit more of a variable look. I think they want to run more zone schemes in terms of blocking. I think
they lost out on JD McKissick, a receiving threat out of the backfield.
That too. And they really lack the home run threat. And the reason why I think Breece Hall makes so much sense for them is because great zone runner, has that home run explosive ability, has the contact balance to break a bunch of tackles, has the pass catching experience. I think he caught over 40 passes last year for Iowa State. He's workable as a pass blocker in the backfield. Like that's the biggest difference between him and Kenneth Walker. Walker, whether or not he caught passes, that's all well and good. He can catch the ball. He's a football player. But the way that I saw it written by our guy Dane Brugler in his annual The Beast draft guide was low batting average as a pass blocker, and his technique needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, guilty of half-hearted cuts or shoulder chips. So when you have that element to it, that guy is not playable on third downs right now. Brees Hall is playable on third downs, can give you a 1-2 punch with him and Devin Singletary. And even though the draft cost might be a little bit insane to some people, I don't think the Bills would lose any sleep by taking Brees Hall. I think their offense would be instantly better with him there.
What do you think about the trend, or maybe it's not a real trend, but it's been apparent? The Bills they've used one first round pick on an offensive player, that being Josh Allen, with this regime. It sort of seemed like a little bit of a strategy to fill this defense with first round picks year after year. And that's worked in a lot of franchises doing it that way.
Yeah, that is interesting. You know, I get so in the weeds with the draft year that I forget about stuff like that. But yeah, that
and you could throw Epinesa in there, even though maybe you would say Stephon Diggs was a first round pick that they traded. But
right.
Their highest pick has been a defensive player every year but one.
Yeah. And I think that probably just,
I'm even going to say Josh Allen was a defensive player because he's a linebacker who plays quarterback.
Well, I wonder if it's written in Sean McDermott's contract. We're going to draft the first round
that they need to take a first round guy.
Year.
Yeah. I mean, it could be. I think it might be like a victim of circumstance based on what's available every single year. But I mean, even to that point, like,
you know what I think? I'm going to throw out just some chum to some folks out there who love to talk about it. I think he was just it was McDermott and Bean sticking it to Brian Dable. It was all over the rift. It was the rift, and they're like, "Look, Dabes, you're going to have to start running the ball more if you want us to help you out in the draft.
I think it's a smart way to build.
We don't like what you do.
It's a smart way to build a roster, but I could also see Sean McDermott maybe wanting defensive players more. Maybe it's not written in the draft plan, but when it comes down to this guy or that guy, the head coach being more fired up about the defensive player than the offensive player more often than not.
Mm-hmm. I think some of it could have to do with once you have that quarterback piece, makes everything better around him. Mm-hmm. And the defense is just an uphill slog every single year because you can't predict what you're going to be on defense from one year to the next. All you can do is continue to add pieces to try and continue that consistency. But defense is like really random, based on a random bounce of the ball off a shoulder pad, or maybe a safety doesn't catch an interception. Maybe the ball bounces off a forced fumble a different way and changes the whole outcome potentially. There's just so many different little random facets to it where you can't predict it, but you can control it as much as the talent that you have out there, at least with the offensive side of things. You know, once you have those 2 or 3, maybe 4 key spots locked in, which are quarterback, top receiver, center for the Bills, which they believe heavily in, and then left tackle, then you can kind of get by in a lot of different spots. You would like to have better talent, and that's why you use later round picks on them, but you can certainly get by a little bit more. So Gabriel Davis has been a revelation for them as a 4th round pick. Dawson Knox is a 3rd round pick. Devin Singletary played really well last year, but you know, the rest of the spots, what have they invested in their offensive line outside of center and left tackle? Like I said before, they haven't taken a guard earlier than the 5th round, and that was Wyatt Teller, who they wound up trading. They haven't taken a guard in the top 5 rounds since. Right tackle, they tried to draft Cody Ford to it. That didn't work. Then drafted Spencer Brown with a 3rd round pick. Still not a 1st round pick. I think they believe the premium spots more often than not lie on the defensive side once you have that offensive piece figured out. So or maybe it's just random. You know, it could be just like who's on the board, who's good that year. But you know, I think it's probably a combination of the two.
The Bills had fantastic luck with Tre'Davious White, but there are no guarantees with the 25th pick.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter who you take, you know, the chance of that person starting right away is probably not great, not only because they generally don't start that late in the draft, and what we've already said about Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane and how they look at that type of player, a rookie, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are just so many variables. You know, you're banking so much on if, and you hope, and trying to get this guy in the system, and just 25 is just because it's a first round pick doesn't mean the guy's going to be starting on opening day and making an impact.
Mhm.
I think it's a crucial draft, or maybe from a macro sense, the Bills are entering a stage of crucial drafts because the way the cap shaping up in contracts, they got to hit on these picks, and it's not necessarily going to help, or we're going to see the benefit this season. But if they miss on the first round pick 2, 3, 4 years in a row, or several times in that period, then 4 years down the line, that's what you're going to be pointing to. Almost like what we see with the Sabres. So you don't see it until they get to the league and they're there for a few years, and you say, yeah, that first round pick, look who we could have had instead. The degree of difficulty is harder when you're picking later in the round. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying they can't make too many luxury picks because they're going to need some players to play eventually.
Mm-hmm. And that point you just made probably works against the whole cornerback pick at 25, because if they want to pay some of their own, they have to let someone walk, and they have 5 key free agents coming up at the end of the season. It's not 4 key free agents, but they do want to sign Ed Oliver to a contract extension. Tremaine Edmonds, Dawson Knox, Jordan Poyer, Devin Singletary. When keeping in mind that you're probably going to pay Ed Oliver, can you really afford to keep all 4 of those players, especially when you've got that much cap stuff going on and Josh Allen's cap hit is about to go up to $40+ million? Probably not. And that's why they kind of have to pick their spots, which comes back to the Jordan Poyer stuff, like not really giving a hint that they were interested in doing the extension and upgrading his pay. That kind of raised a couple of flags, and it's sound logic. I mean, the guy just turned 31. Actually, today's his birthday. He just turned 31 today. And are you really going to extend an age 32 safety when declining ability is such a real thing in the NFL? And once it goes, it's gone. Then you've got Micah Hyde at 32 years old past that, and where you have to kind of start investing into the future. I would not rule out, because of what Tim just kind of pointed out, that 25, there's no, and what Jonah pointed out too, there's no sure thing when you get that late in the draft. I would not rule out Brandon Beane trying to make a big move up the board in this draft. He said he doesn't have 32 first round grades. That's pretty normal, but I think there's some guys who could, or at least one player in particular, that could really pique his interest and cross off a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. And then having a core building block, potential star moving forward, if he can get the right deal. And what's also working in his favor is that everybody in the draft this year wants to move down, which means it's a buyer's market, and you could probably move up for less than you would have previously in a quarterback heavy year. So that's another element to this, to where maybe if Beane sees this one specific player that I'm alluding to, and I'll just say it, Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, I think he's super compelling for the Bills and everything they want to do.
Yeah, I was wondering if you knew who the player was, or you were trying to poke and dagger there.
No, that's like that's, to me, he just represents everything for what they want. I mean, he is the Tremaine Edmonds of safeties. Super big, tall. He's at least 2 inches taller than everybody else in the safety class this year. He's 20 to 30 pounds heavier than everyone else. He's got longer arms than everybody on the safety class. He's super fluid, can play both positions, can play sub package linebacker this year if they wanted him to, can play nickel, can go one-on-one against tight ends. Like this is the exact type of guy that Brandon Beane usually moves up for. And I could see him getting really excited if Hamilton ends up falling down the board a little bit.
Where do you think they would have to go to get value and to not reach where would roughly 15, 12, top 20? I'm not sure.
Because of the reduced draft costs, I would not rule them out of getting into the top 10 for this guy if they really wanted to, because I don't know that it would be so cost prohibitive that they'd be like, okay, now we're out. As long as they're not surrendering their first round pick next year, I think anything is on the table to go.
Well, that
get
could be the
guy.
Doug Whaley line of thinking of, we'll give you our first round pick next year because it's going to be 32.
Yeah. That's a challenge, and to have that much confidence. And I think they're better than trying to think that they're just going to be the best team in the NFL or have a late 20s pick or something like that. But I look at that 7 pick as the spot where it becomes an actual possibility. The draft stock on Hamilton is all over the place, depending on where you read. Some people have him in the bottom half of the top 10, like Tony Pauline of Pro Football Network said recently that, many believe he'll get somewhere between 15 to 20. It's probably somewhere between the middle, but if you're Bean and you feel like this guy can be a star in your system, they view safety as a premium spot, and he is, and it's going to cost you this year's second rounder. Go get that guy. I mean, Bean will often say, "Hey, if there's someone that excites me in this draft, I'm going to do what it takes to go get that player within reason."
What do you think? All right, so we talked about how it would make sense for the Bills to draft a safety. We talked about it. Planning for the future, be groomed under Hyde and Poyer, the whole thing. What do you think Poyer's reaction would be, though? Do you think he'd see it the way we just discussed it?
No, absolutely not. I mean,
would his wife?
Oh God, definitely not.
For those who don't follow closely enough, Jordan Poyer's wife has been negotiating in public for him in a new contract, and I'm sure the Bills don't love it. I'm sure the Bills view that as a headache they don't need.
Yeah. I think he'll say it publicly that it's part of the business, and which it is, but it doesn't mean Jordan Poyer gets taken off the field this year. I mean, we just talked about how much.
No, but it probably means that his strategy of hiring Drew Rosenhaus and having Drew Rosenhaus go public with his demand and a belief that maybe he doesn't show up for mandatory workouts or whatever happens, that plan has backfired.
Mm-hmm.
Probably that's the way he'll view it, or that, disrespect.
It could be disrespect, but at some point you have to not worry about everyone's feelings. That's just part of it. And I thought Bean gave a really eloquent answer about having to, not pay people. Like, he wants to pay everybody, but it's just not always in the card. Sometimes your values differ than what the players value themselves.
What I find amusing, and we all of us can comment on this, the fan reaction to or the contradiction between Stephon Diggs getting his money. And of course, he scores touchdowns. He's a lot of fun. He makes Josh Allen better. I get it. I mean, I understand the offensive player. Those are the people that you watch and you see on a play-to-play basis. You watch him run routes, even if you might not be getting the ball, type thing. But then Jordan Poyer comes out and he wants some money, and everybody's like, "See you later, dude." I mean, the guy was an all-pro, but there's just something where the fans are like, "Adios."
He's a bit older.
Shit. I just kind of, and I guess it's the defensive play, but I understand it, but I still find it amusing.
I think the concern, just to react to what Joe said, or what you asked, Joe, isn't so much that Jordan Poyer is going to stop playing well if there's another safety on the roster, because I think they're going to draft multiple defensive backs at some point in the draft. But if they make a big move to go up and get the best safety in the draft, or a safety in the top 10 or 15, multiple picks invested in that pick, that really telegraphs where they're going at that position. And it's the leadership that you get out of Poyer and Hyde. And if they feel undercut or like they're playing out the string and not part of the future here, that could really hurt the morale on defense, I believe, if you don't have, and maybe that just happens with Jordan Poyer's contract situation in general, but I think there's a way you can play that and have him play great for you in a contract year if he still feels invested and like that contract extension is a possibility down the line.
Yeah, you know how I get what you're saying, and I think there's a way to kind of do everything here. If they make it clear that, hey, we're not going to extend past this year, but here's an extra $3 million, because they have the cap space for it if they want to, and that's a way to just kind of bridge that gap. Yeah, just toss $3 million at him, and then that way it gets him up to what, 13 million for this season on a per year average. I think he would probably not love that, but he's not going to look at 3 million and be like, well, no, I'm out. And he really doesn't have any leverage either. That's another part about this. I mean, he wants to be a part of a Super Bowl team. And
he has the leverage of being an all-pro, which is a great badge. However,
yeah,
that leverage is negated by the idea that he wears people out, or at least
he's popular within the team. I think he has some leverage, as much leverage as you can have in this situation.
Well, what I mean, Jonah, is that there's not going to be a fan pushback. Here's the thing, and the Bills aren't going to do this, and I don't want them to do this. Jordan Poyer's a really good player. He's a great player.
He definitely
is great, especially for that defense. And I believe that they need him. I'm just kind of rolling this out. But if Brandon Beane were to cut him tomorrow, there would not be a huge pushback from the fans, I don't think.
Maybe not, but I think there'd be huge pushback from
because
there
is that sentiment, like I was talking about. They're like, fuck this guy. Oh, he wants money? Fuck him. It's like, hey, it's not your money, fans. Let them figure it out. Like, they'll find a way. I just find it interesting that
but the people on Twitter that hate Jordan Poyer and his wife because they're anti-vaccine,
right?
The same as the rest of the.
My point is, there's not going to be any public push there's zero public sentiment for the Bills better take care of this guy or I'm going to be pissed.
What I meant by
none of that.
And what I meant by not having any leverage is the way that things are structured now. It does not benefit him at all to have a holdout. Like, he could do the TJ Watt style hold in if he wanted to, and just like go through the motions during practice and, not participate, but not really participate. He could do that, but he's not getting paid what he wants this year. And then, if it would just be a bad situation.
There could be the Jarris Bird / Eugene Parker approach, or also the Percy Harvin approach, where you come up with something that can't be diagnosed.
Yes.
And it's like, this plantar fasciitis is just, I can't run on it. Or you know what? I'm having migraines. My migraine headaches
are on a podcast sometimes on Fridays,
preventing me from performing. And no matter how many MRIs you take in my head, it's not going to show up, but I swear to God, it is killing me, and I'm not going to be able to practice this week.
Joe, do you think he could leverage a trade if there's another team that wants to give him a contract extension? Is that maybe a scenario that could happen?
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't rule out a trade to the Giants. I mean, Dable knows him. Joe Shane knows him. They have a pretty big need at safety right now. It would be absent of them having their strong safety that they wanted to have for this season, but I'm sure there could be something arranged there. The Giants are fixing their salary cap. Maybe they want him for the next 3 years, give him that money he desires because they have the cap space to do it. I could definitely see that happening. Poyer has been part of this for so long that I just wonder if he's like, you know what, screw it. Let's just see this thing out, because, and I'm sure it would be helped if they give him the 2-3 million in this major hypothetical scenario we've built for ourselves here. But at some point, you have to realize what the team is willing to do and what they're not willing to do. And that's why I think the team kind of has the leverage here, especially if they were to draft a guy like Kyle Hamilton or even Lewis Seen from Georgia. Like, there's still a quite amount of leverage there from a team perspective. And not to say that they would hold it over his head. They were very careful in, showering him with praise and all of this and how much he's meant to the organization and to what they've done so far. That's great. But for teams, contracts are projection, not past. And what does Jordan Poyer project in age 32 and age 33 season? And is he going to be anywhere close to an all-pro level in those 2 seasons? Those are the questions that the Bills are asking themselves.
And I know it's different positions, but I'm sure he sees what Von Miller just got.
Mhm.
I mean, and whatever translation that is, you want to have obviously it's not safety money is not edge rusher money, but I'm sure Jordan Poyer's looking at that and saying they're banking on this guy performing at 34.
Mhm.
Let's go. Bank on me going at 34, even if it's good safety money. What is he, the 13th highest paid safety in the NFL this
Mhm.
year?
Mhm.
I'm an all pro, man. Get me in the top 5.
The problem is top 5 would get him to 15 million, and that's near Von Miller money at
Right.
that point. And I don't think they want to do that.
You might as well just give it to Kyle Hamilton in 4 years.
Right. Exactly. I think a lot of it has to do with how they project specific positions too, like you kind of alluded to. The edge rusher, they can age gracefully because not all of them depend solely on speed. And the thing that impressed me more than anything with Von Miller is that he did not depend on speed as much as I thought he would have at this point in his career. So I think he could sustain having a really nice couple to 3 seasons for the Bills, even though he's up there in age. Safety, you can get by with instincts a lot of time, but once that speed starts to go and you're just a half a second late to getting to a running lane to take down a ball carrier, or the whole idea of playing that deep middle and being half a second or a quarter of a second too slow to break up a pass, that's all the difference. Whereas with pass rusher, like, you can get by with a lot of physical traits more than anything. So that's when the projection of safety comes into play. Like, how much does this player depend on his speed, and what does it look like when that speed starts to wane? We saw it the last couple of years, really, at the wide receiver position with John Brown, losing a step, and then Cole Beasley, same deal last year. They just weren't the same players that they were the year prior. And that kind of made their decisions easier for them in the off seasons.
Skeezier.
So what happens with Jordan
made
Poyer?
their decision skeezier, did you say?
Easier. I'm sorry.
But you corrected yourself. Did it say ski? I like that. It made their decision skeezier.
No. Yeah, it made their decisions easier because they lost a step. So I trust me, I think Jordan Poyer's a really good player. I think he's been awesome for them over the last 5 years. I'm in no way saying trade him or anything like that. I'm just saying that the Bills should probably start to build for the future at that position because it's so important. And it's not even Poyer. Hyde is 31 as well, and his contract's up in 2 years. So they've got like a developing hole where they could have 2 brand new starting safeties in 2024. And you're probably going to want to have one in place by the time 2023 rolls around that isn't a rookie.
And Saran Neal's an important player, but not Hyde Poyer replacement.
Yeah.
If they can get a player with the coverage skills to play all over the secondary, similar to how Micah Hyde does, and then eventually be the new Micah Hyde, that probably would be the ideal, as you mentioned, the ideal player to trade up for.
Yeah, I think they have some hope internally for Damar Hamlin. And I don't know. I mean, he was just a rookie last year, a late round pick. They liked him a lot last year. They want to see where he goes from here, but that you can't bank on a late round guy. So Hamilton, I think he probably projects best to the Poyer role, but you can use him everywhere. Like, they used Saran Neal in spots against tight ends, just in man-to-man coverage last year. And Saran Neal is fine. He's got the height, weight, speed, and arm length going on, but it's just doesn't have that great coverage nuance to him where he tends to lose his man a bunch, and there's separation, and it leads to some results for the opposing team. And they didn't utilize it all that frequently. Kyle Hamilton is the complete opposite of that. I mean, this guy can do a lot of what you need in the defensive backfield. The only thing that he's not going to be able to do is play boundary cornerback. Every other role that you could want from him, he can do. And he does it in a ridiculous 6'4", 220-pound, 33-inch arm length package that I'm sure Brandon Beane just absolutely loves.
Sounds like a young Tim Graham.
If he's trying to get drafted by Brandon Bean, the worst thing he could do is play boundary cornerback, you say?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Well, there is that one guy, Dax Hill, who some people are like, okay, well, you can throw him at corner because he's got like some good fluidity to him where he can turn and run. But my main question about him is I don't really love him as a strong long-term strong safety. And so what you would be doing with him in his first year is saying, okay, go play boundary cornerback in your first year. Then we're going to switch you to strong safety. Then we're going to switch you to free safety in 3 straight years. That just doesn't sound like Sean McDermott to me, but I could be wrong.
I want to reiterate that I don't think that the Bills should cut Jordan Poyer. I know that my for instance that I came up with 10 minutes or so ago made it sound like maybe I was a little exuberant about the idea. I'm not. I think I'm with Joe. He's a great player.
Mm-hmm.
I just find it weird, the public sentiment on such a good player and how fans can pick and choose who they get behind when it comes to getting a new contract. And I just don't think that there's a lot of public sentiment for getting Jordan Poyer paid that I think that he would like to have in terms of a push from a PR standpoint of let's get this guy locked up. He's not going to hear that from the fans. Or he's not going to get that too much on social media. Joe, do the Bills draft a punter?
Yes, I think they do. And I have some punter analysis, but I don't want to bore you with it.
Just a little. Give us a taste,
Okay.
Please.
I think the top 2 guys in this year's draft, Areza, who people call punt god and everybody wants. I did a mock draft mailbag, and 65% of the mock draft submissions had this guy drafted to the Bills. I swear to God, it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. Everyone loves him.
What round is what's the sentiment on the round?
It really depended. Someone had him in the 3rd. Some people had him go all the way to the 7th. So the range was crazy. But it's him and Jordan Stout out of Penn State. And what I find interesting about these 2 guys is that their high range potential is what the Bills wanted their last 2 punters to be, which were completely different styles. Bojorquez was huge leg, outkick the coverage, and just completely flip the field. And they wound up not wanting to invest in him because he was too inconsistent before he became a free agent. Then
and
last
not a
year,
great holder.
Right, exactly. Then Matt Hawk.
Can these guys hold? Because if they can, I don't
That's a
think
great question. It's not on Dane Brugler's scouting reports, I don't think.
It should
might
be, I think, because I think that's going to matter on this team, isn't it?
Yeah, probably will. I actually haven't looked, so I don't want to mischaracterize Dane because he does an amazing job. The guy literally wrote 30,000
more than
words.
they punt, right?
Yeah. So that is important. But the other guy, Stout, is more like Matt Hawk because he's more of precision, accuracy, pinning a team within the 10-yard line, the 5-yard line. So I will find it very interesting to see which one that they actually prefer because they have shown both. That's just like nerdy punt stuff.
They got to take Stout. I think all of the headlines and puns we can use with having a stout leg and a stout punter.
Over Punt God?
Was that his real name? Is that his birth name? Punt God?
Yeah, Punt God.
Yeah, it's like God, Sham God. He was their cousins.
God, Punt God. All right, okay.
Yeah. No, if it is Areza, then it would give us another same first name punting competition for the Bills. Like they had Corey Carter versus Corey Bojorquez. Then they had Corey Bojorquez versus Kari Vedvik. So it was like a slant rhyme. And this would give them Matt Hawk versus Matt Areza. I just want to be compelled.
You need stories to write about on the 15th day of camp, and that sounds
the Puntapalooza is real.
Joe, who is this year? And Jonah, I'd like to bring you in on this. You're going to be covering the draft for the Associated Press this week. So I know that you have your thoughts too.
The punter day, 3rd day.
Who is the Ben Simmons of this year's NFL draft class?
Wow. Who's the number 1 pick?
I think Ben Simmons is in the news for other things than being the number 1 pick lately.
I mean, Maybe Joe can take this because maybe he understands where you're going with this.
I don't even know where you're going with
A
it.
dog, a flop, a quitter, a guy who comes up with plantar fasciitis and migraine headaches, a guy who is unreliable despite everything that was put upon him, a guy who just doesn't want to play, a guy who fiddle
I don't
fucks
know. I mean,
around for a lot of money.
Sounds like
I
a
got
guy you don't
nothing
want
for
to
this.
draft.
Right. Exactly.
Cross him off my board.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know.
All
I mean,
right. Well, I think
Ben,
maybe
it's interesting that you say that about Ben
is
Simmons.
there a guy you want to stay away from? Is there plutonium in this draft?
I mean, I don't know. So Ben Simmons kind of dogged in college, and I don't think he quit on his team, but wasn't an effective player in the NCAA tournament and didn't help LSU very much. And it seems like maybe the 76ers should have seen that come in, even though now he's on the Nets. But anyways, I don't know. Some of these guys that don't play in their bowl games, I don't know if any of that's been looked at. Is that a red flag for NFL potential? Does that not have
What, pulling out of bowl
it?
games?
Yeah. Is that something? I mean, Tim's kind of fabricating a hot take in my own head, but that's maybe where I'd start looking at that. Guys that quit on their college team, maybe they're going to quit on their pro team.
I don't think NFL teams care. I think they would rather them be healthy than anything.
Yeah, I wonder, do they care if a guy's been transferred to 5 teams or he was bouncing all over college football and wasn't a good college football team?
Yeah.
They seem to say they care about those things.
Yeah, I think the Bills would investigate each circumstance because they really don't like to. They don't like to put negative attitudes within their locker room in terms of draft prospects, and so they usually strive for salt of the earth guys, and they've done a lot of that. Like some of them are crazy in their own way, but they're good natured. Like Ed Oliver, I don't know what the hell he's talking about half the time when we're talking to him, but he's hilarious and he really works at his craft, and that's the try hard is the exact right way to put it. So yeah, I think they invest in that. They invest time in that stuff and try to talk to friends of friends and the bartenders just outside the college area to try and figure out what the real scoop is on these guys, rather than just getting fluff from coaches and teammates and things like that have that player's best interest in mind.
As we transition into real quick NBA playoff talk, Jonah and I have had this discussion before. I know his thoughts on it, Joe. I mean, or if you guys talk between yourselves here, who is the more frustrating playoff personality? I can't even say player because they're not playing. Ben Simmons or Zion Williamson? Zion Williamson might actually make it onto the court at some point if New Orleans keeps playing the way it's been playing.
I know. I didn't they rule? I thought they ruled Zion out.
Yeah, he's not going there.
He's out for the whole thing. Like even if they advance.
I mean, maybe I don't think they've cemented that, but I mean, he's dunking between his legs in warmups. He probably could have played.
Right, that's the thing.
See why he's going to play later.
That's the thing. He's doing full court workouts for the last 3 weeks or whatever the hell it's been. But what's he missing? Why can't he play 7 minutes? Why can't he get out there and give him some good shifts, to borrow a hockey term?
It's fair. I out of the question you just asked, I would probably say Zion is more frustrating, just because this Pelicans team would be legit with him in the lineup. Like they're really good right now and they're pushing Phoenix. Brandon Ingram has gone to a different level. He's been so much fun to watch this whole year. As soon as McCollum got there was like a feeling out process between those two guys for like a good 5, 6, 7 games. For some reason, I watch a lot of Pelicans games. Don't judge me.
I saw him live this season.
You did?
Oh yeah.
Where?
In New Orleans when the Bills played Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's right.
Oh yeah. I'm all up in the Pelicans business.
You big Jose Alvarado fan?
The Pelicans.
Oh, Jose Alvarado. He's the hiding in the corner.
Listen,
on the inbounds.
Ask Mark Gahn about Jose Alvarado when you see him this week. Just tell him.
I want to say Jose Alvarado.
I want Mark to tell you what.
He was off the bench, junior varsity minutes when I saw him play.
Uh-huh.
Did he come on later in the season?
Yeah,
he's like a core guy.
Game ball last night.
Yeah, it was like the Pelicans were up by 20 or whatever, and he finally came in the last 4 minutes of the game. And I was like, what the fuck is this I'm watching? It's a Tasmanian devil like zipping through trees. And
he looks like the kind of cornerback the Bills need.
he intercepts a lot of passes, steals a lot of, makes a lot of turnovers happen. Their team is just like, if they had that Zion element, they have Ingram, they have McCollum, they've got a big in Valanciunas who can give you really good minutes. Herb Jones is awesome as a rookie.
Oh, yeah.
Alvarado is super fun as a 6th, 7th man. They've got some depth in Devontae Graham that can come off the bench and give you some hot streak shooting.
No relation.
Right.
Yeah.
Devontae and Tim. But if Zion was there, I think they could challenge to go to the finals. I really do.
I would say, I'm going to answer Tim's question this way. Maybe I'll just go on and on answering it multiple ways. But I'm more frustrated that Zion Williams is not playing, because I think he's one of the most fun and exciting players to watch. And I think
that too.
I think he's healthy. I mean, I don't really want to question somebody's physical health, but he had a foot surgery in the offseason, and it's been talked about like he was coming back any week now since preseason. It seems like he could have gotten out there and tried it at some point. And it does seem like he's sitting out and playing a long game towards getting traded or moved out of that market and really never playing for the Pelicans again. In terms of what Tim asked, with which team should be more frustrated, you got to be frustrated if you're the Nets, because you traded away James Harden. You didn't think Ben Simmons had a back injury and wasn't going to play in the playoffs. The Nets thought they were adding him in. Now they don't have him. They don't have Harden either. I think they're the most frustrated team because they're built to win now. They had this issue with Kyrie Irving not playing the home.
But isn't that the same thing with New Orleans? That was the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah,
and I think we have this team that, as Joe says, if this guy's on the court, we're a contender.
Yeah, but they snuck into the playoffs a little bit. I think and partly in New Orleans, I think they'd be fine with letting Zion Williams sit out the whole season if they think they're getting them back next year. If this is part of the long game towards getting traded to New York, yeah, I'm sure the fan base is very frustrated that another number 1 pick's pushing his way out of there and didn't even play nearly as many games as Anthony Davis did in that city. But there's still hope that maybe he's like Kawhi Leonard and just wants to take a full year to recover, and then he'll come back healthy next year. I don't know. There's other things with Zion Williamson. He needs to get in shape. There's other aspects to his game that still need to improve. I think overall, with how good John Morant is, New Orleans fans might be frustrated with Zion Williamson's career, how it's played out so far.
With Ben Simmons, do you think, because he was slated to come back game 4, and we're obviously taping this before game 4 happened. Mm-hmm. Do you think that because they went down 3-0, they chose to shut him down rather than force him back in, because probably not coming back at this point, because it's such a statistical anomaly to come back from 3-0 in the NBA?
I think that's part of it. Absolutely. But I also think there might be a little bit of a physical health standpoint to where they haven't said he's not coming back at all. He's not playing game 4.
Yeah.
So if they happen to win 2-3 games without him, he still might come back later in the playoffs. I think they thought, and there's probably a disconnect between him and there's a mental and physical health component. And maybe he also isn't so comfortable coming back this late in the season. He hasn't played all year. He's never played with these teammates. Mm-hmm. It does seem like an odd situation to throw him into an elimination game in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, totally right.
Maybe if they did somehow come back and win the series, maybe he plays in the next series. But again, from the fan standpoint, I think it's frustrating that the Nets, with 2 of the 10 best players in the world, Kevin Durant, one of the very best players, that this was supposed to be the best first round series, and there have been competitive games, but it seemed like it's going to be a competitive series. And I think it's disappointing that the Nets weren't at full health and we couldn't see a better showing from one of the marquee franchises with marquee players in these playoffs.
I think this has shown how impressive the Celtics are, because they did the first 2 games without Time Lord, and Robert Williams was outstanding throughout the entire season. And now they have that defensive presence back in there to go with Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Tatum has ascended into a superstar. It might just be bad luck that they went against the Celtics rather than, maybe they even might have pushed the Bucks a little bit more than they would have the Celtics. The Celtics have just been on a heater since, I don't know, game 50.
They're the best defensive team in the league.
Yeah,
very well
awesome.
coached. And very well how Brad Stevens moves up from the GM, Danny Ainge gets moved out, and they hire a new coach. It did seem like maybe there was you weren't so sure how that was going to play out with all those changes, and they didn't start the season so great, and some young players, whether they get along or not. And now, yeah, they look like a team that could win the championship, and beating the Nets, who have a lot of talent the way they have so far in this series, is very impressive.
Have we changed our minds on who the favorite is to win the whole thing based on what we've seen here through the playoffs so far?
Who was the favorite?
Yeah.
I'm asking you guys who you maybe would have picked, and has your opinion changed here in the last week or week and a half?
I'm wondering who the betting favorite was. I know the Nets, even with their record, hung up near the top.
Yeah, they were up there.
If not
the
top
Suns
team.
were up there too.
Yeah, the Suns were the best team in the regular season, and I guess the mathematical favorite. They have Devin Booker injured. The Bucks, who are they the favorite? They won the championship last year. They're looking pretty good, I think.
And then Middleton just got hurt though. So
right,
that's a big
yeah.
thing.
So I think it's pretty wide open, and the Celtics look like a possible favorite, and maybe they didn't look like that. I think Celtics fans especially probably saw this coming into the playoffs, but I don't think everybody realized how good the Celtics were coming down the stretch. But it's similar to last year. It's another weird playoffs where some of the very best players and the very best teams aren't playing, either due to injury or the Lakers not making it. And I mean, I guess the Suns and the Bucks are the best team in the league, but if they play again for the championship, I don't know if I'm that excited to see that again and really feel like the best players and the best teams are playing for the title 2 years in a row.
I think my optimal finals here is Celtics Warriors, just because two different styles. Who's going to have to blink in terms of who's on the court, who's not, because the Warriors go with this ridiculous small lineup that is just so effective and so efficient with Jordan Poole and Draymond and Steph and Clay and Andrew Wiggins. Like, they don't have a natural big out there. And can Williams or Robert Williams survive in that sort of way? The Celtics like to play two bigs at once usually. So what really gives when they get to that point? I would be, just from a scheming standpoint, I think that would be my favorite possible finals matchup.
Philly would be fun too, but
yeah,
Joel
they're
Embiid
gonna get beat up against Miami. Yeah.
Well, Joe, thanks for sticking around for an hour and 15 minutes. Hopefully that wasn't too much of your afternoon, but you filed your big story. You're on the come down. You're decompressing. This is like, easing. Maybe you need to go take a nap.
Maybe.
Put a nice bag on your head.
I'll probably just wind up thinking about what my first round of my mock draft is going to look like on Thursday. It's that week where it's just like, okay, there's no escape about what's going to happen this week.
What's good? Like what is satisfying? And how do you score your draft? Because there are trades involved. Do you go by position, by team? Like, how do you justify the different maneuvers? And how do you score yourself? I think,
well, there's some sites out there that score your mock draft and put it comparatively with the rest of the country. I think Fantasy Pros does that. I think the Huddle Report does that, if I'm not mistaken. But
and are you in there?
I was in Fantasy Pros last year. I didn't know it until like 2 weeks ago when they tweeted like, "Hey, these people were in our mock draft competition last year," and I'm like, "Wait,
how'd you do?"
Wait, I was. I came in 15th somehow. I don't know.
Out of how many?
17. Hundreds. Yes, out of 17. Hundreds.
Joe is a fantasy football pro. I would call him that, as a player and a commissioner.
I appreciate you for saying that.
Joe knows what he's doing. Joe is he is the standard, and always has been. And I think it's because he puts a little too much time into it that I'm not willing to do. Yeah, again, it goes back to what we started off at the beginning. I'm at the surface, man. I'm not gonna. I mean, I'll give you some analysis on what I see and what I know from the Bills, but going like putting together a mock draft and who the best, this and that, who's the best guard in this year's draft. What about this guy from Central Michigan? I mean, who the hell knows what he's going to be? Central Michigan's got two offensive linemen. Two offensive
They did.
linemen that were invited to the combine. And did Central Michigan? How many games did Central Michigan win? I
That's
don't
a great question. Here's the
do
fun.
you know, Mr. Mid-American Conference.
Oh yeah, good point.
Central
Yeah, I
Michigan.
wasn't even listening. I was thinking about something I wanted to say about Joe, but
All right, go ahead and say
Uh,
what you got to say about Joe, and then we got to let him go.
well, no, I was thinking in what you said. I tire a lot of the draft analysis too, especially when it's in January, February, even earlier than that. It's such a long pre-draft season. But Joe's been doing this 15, 20 years at least, analyzing the draft and from multiple outlets. So I think I like hearing what he has to say, reading his articles, and so I do like Joe. I don't like the Joe Bs that have been spawned underneath Joe B, and that there's 10, 15 Joe Bs in every different market now. It's kind of saturated. But if it was just back in the day where it was like Mel Kiper and Joe B, and that was all the draft analysts I got, I'd be happy with that. And the Buffalo News, Mark Gahn, I've always liked his kind of
Mark does a great job
down the draft. And he's been doing it for a long time too.
Yeah,
I wonder
Mark,
if Joe knows this so well that he can tell me today on Monday what my day 3 lead's going to be on Saturday. Because that would be nice if I could get that pre-written.
Well, the good thing
just
is, Jonah,
lead
you
with
have
Punt
multiple,
God.
you have
God,
more
that might be
rounds.
it.
You have a lot of rounds to choose from. You can just go with the best story. It doesn't have to be the guy who was drafted in the 4th round.
Mhm.
Right. You
It
have
can
more
be whoever
options.
you want.
Yeah. But
It's
you
going to
gotta
be
pick that
somebody's
out.
going to
You
have
gotta
a
filter that
family
out.
connection. So he's going to be the son of Hall of Famer or some shit.
Yeah. Or quarterback
Central Michigan.
headlines.
Central Michigan won 9 games last year, 9-4 overall, 6-2 in the conference.
Oh, I
Wanna know the funny thing
Why
about
didn't you
the-
ask me?
I did ask you.
You know the funny thing about the whole draft and studying up on it. I'm like you, Tim. I do not watch college football during the year. I just can't do it. Same kind of deal. Like Saturday is my off day from football, where I just need to recharge the batteries or travel to whatever destination we're going to. And then once the playoffs are done or the Bills are eliminated from the playoffs, that's when I start to dig into draft prospects. I also find it like easier for me to be so disconnected from college football. So that way I don't have preconceived notions of the players when I go to watch them. And that helps me analyze them from a pro perspective rather than like, oh, did you see this guy and his performance in the national semifinals, stuff like that? It's like, no, I didn't. I don't know anything about that, but
There's
I'll
a
watch
reason
it.
people who win the Heisman Trophy don't always work out in the NFL.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, lighten it up against TCU versus how does this guy project as a left tackle in the AFC East is a bit different.
Mm-hmm,
A bit,
sure.
Quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, thank you for this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Jonah, thank you as always. I meant to bring it up earlier. It got away from me, but the Old Dirty Bastard shirt is fantastic. Probably
Okay,
could have
I'll
been.
take it. It actually doesn't say.
Oh, it's not ODB. What is it?
It looked like ODB.
What is it? QDA.
QDA, yes. That's the gym where I work out at, Quarter Deck Athletics.
I see.
Which, wait, let me just tie this into the podcast real quick. Last week I said I was going to the gym and I was hoping that some of the pro wrestlers would be there. And it turns out, because it's right by the arena, it turns out while we were doing this podcast with John Vogel last Monday, CrossFit Jesus, Seth Rollins, and his wife, Becky Lynch, were actually working out at my gym at that time. So if we weren't doing this podcast, I would have been down there clanging and banging the weights with those two. Super.
I'll be damned.
But I was here instead, doing my duties to TGAF and our listeners.
Hey, before we go, as I like to do, I want to remind everybody, well, go watch let's see how I can phrase this without stepping in at some sort of trademark violation. Go watch the pro football rookie selection process this week. All your professional basketball postseason action, professional at the highest level baseball games.
RJ's last call. Are we violating any?
I don't think RJ is. Yeah, you can do all of that stuff and all the pay-per-views. There was a big boxing match over the weekend. Watch all of that at Amherst Pizza and Ale House at 55 Cross Point Parkway in Gettsville. That's right off of Millersport Highway in the 990. Amherst Pizza and Ale House, TVs indoors, outdoors, Awesome patio. Check it all out now that the weather's getting better and you can bet legally on all this stuff in New York. Recognized by ESPN.com as Western New York's top spot to watch sports. Stop in or call for takeout and delivery. This is Amherst Pizza and Ale House I'm talking about. 716-625-7100. Again, 716-625-7100. Amherst Pizza and Ale House. Joey, much
Kenny?
love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate you giving your insights, scooping your own Buffalo Beat podcast. You will now have nothing left to talk about with Matt Beauvais tomorrow.
No, there will be it'll actually just be me tomorrow. And there will be
all by yourself.
Yeah, because I'm doing a Q&A style. So
I see.
So there have been at least 8 punter questions asked so far on the tweet. So we're doing well.
Well, I'm glad we didn't dive too much into that. I don't want to spoil your hot takes on the punter. Thanks for this. Thank you, Jonah. And thank you to everyone out there for watching/listening. Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. CTBK is more than just a full-service accounting firm. They are one team with an innovative approach to accounting and rise to each new challenge with collaborative problem-solving skills. CTBK goes above and beyond by lending helping hands in the Buffalo and Niagara community through volunteer work and donations, and is partnered up with Victory Sports for 2020 and 2021 to keep kids in the community active. The professionals at CTBK are determined to help individuals and businesses succeed. Whether a large corporation, a small business, or somewhere in between, call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400, and see what CTBK's one-team approach can do for you.